Rowena
is online. So,
Are we ready to go?
where's Scott? Yeah, just wait 1 second for incognito witness. She's has to.
Okay.
She's wearing a mask. Like
I know,
Cecil.
no, I just talked to her.
Hearing.
Okay. Government employees and police joined the Tiananmen students. Their voices echoed through the streets of over 400 cities, demanding a future built on justice, freedom, and dignity. Late in the evening on June 3rd and into June 4th, 1989, the Chinese Communist Party leadership unleashed the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, upon the protesters. They used brute force and legal force against peaceful protest. Guns and tanks crushed innocent civilians, young and old alike. The precise number of casualties to this day is unknown. There has been no public accounting of the events of that week and no justice for the victims. Rather, those seeking to commemorate the event or seek information about those killed, like the Tiananmen mothers, are harassed, detained, and arrested themselves. One of the most iconic figures of the Tiananmen massacre is that of the tank man, the solitary figure with shopping bags in hand who stood in front of the advancing line of tanks. That act of brave defiance inspired the world and reminds us why the heroic protest movement of 1989 must never be forgotten. Tiananmen is not simply a past event to study and ponder, but a present reminder that when the Chinese people are free to assemble, to act, and to speak, they demand freedom, democracy, and political reform. What happened on Tiananmen Square in 1989 should also remind us that the principles of freedom and democracy are not only American principles. The fundamental human yearning for dignity and liberty is not limited to any one region or country in the world. They are aspirations that transcend countries and culture, and neither tanks nor torture can erase them. Nonetheless, as we look at the China of today, the prospects for greater civil and political rights seem as remote today as they did the day after the tanks rolled through Tiananmen Square. An increasingly aggressive Chinese Communist Party government is more repressive in domestic politics, more mercantilistic in trade and economic policy, increasingly dismissive of international norms, and more assertive in exporting the authoritarian model globally. While repression looks so much different today than it did 35 years ago, the goal remains the same: to preserve the Communist Party's monopoly, an absolute monopoly, on political power through any means possible: state-sponsored indoctrination, a pervasive surveillance state, arbitrary detention, torture, and transnational repression. At this moment in time, the United States and its allies face a systemic challenge from the Chinese Communist government and its authoritarian allies in Russia, Iran, and North Korea. It is a challenge we cannot avoid, and one where promotion of human rights and freedom must be recognized as a strategic advantage against authoritarianism. I am proud to work by the CECC and its amazing staff to shine a bright light on Xi Jinping's atrocities these past 5 years. I am proud that the Congress has worked across the aisle to address genocide and to stop any company from profiting from forced labor of Uyghurs and other predominantly Muslim ethnic minorities. But there's so much more to do. The United States must do a better job leading the free world's democracies and holding the Chinese Communist government accountable through sanctions in the United States and at the United Nations for its ongoing blatant repression of the Chinese people. We must take all steps to stop the Chinese Communist government's efforts to export their authoritarian model around the world, which they are aggressively doing. We must find more efficient ways to stop American companies from subsidizing tyranny and forced labor. We must better protect Chinese students and the Chinese diaspora from transnational repression. We must treat the Great Firewall of China like the 21st century Berlin Wall. Tearing it down must be a critical U.S. priority, allowing the dissemination of news and information within China and allowing the Chinese people to communicate freely and securely. At the same time, we must also stand resolutely with those in China and Hong Kong who are imprisoned and disappeared, those persecuted and silenced, those censored and suppressed, the Chinese pastor, the Uyghur, the labor organizer, the Tibetan Buddhist monk, the human rights lawyer, the Hong Kong democracy activist, and countless others living under the repressive policies of the Chinese Communist government. We must communicate to the Chinese people that their struggle and pain has not been and will not be forgotten, and that we believe that the Chinese Communist Party will eventually be consigned to the ash heap of history. To do anything less dishonors the spirit of Tiananmen and those who stood so bravely and resolutely for freedom. I'd like to now yield to our very distinguished co-chair, Senator Merkley. I would just make a note, and I apologize to our witnesses, and we have a great group of witnesses today. My wife is in the hospital. It's pretty serious, very serious, nearby, and I have to leave to go, again, be by her side. But again, I thank you, and I thank my good friend, Senator Merkley, for his work on this commission. It's extraordinary.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And today, being June 4th, this is an appropriate day for our hearing of the Congressional-Executive Commission on China because of the focus on the events of June 3rd and 4th, 1989. Focus on not just Tiananmen Square, but the activities across China, hundreds of cities across China. The activities and the response to those activities really shocked the conscience of the world and the conscience of this Congress. The massacre of peaceful protesters by their own government spurred a decade of debate here in Congress about whether the U.S. should condition trade relations with China on improvement in human rights. Our chairman, Congressman Smith, was at the forefront of those bipartisan debates along with Speaker Emerita Pelosi. That question was settled in the year 2000 when Congress and President Clinton granted permanent normal trade relations to the People's Republic of China. Congress insisted, however, that the deal include a mechanism to monitor China's progress on human rights and rule of law. That insistence, that legislation, created this commission, bicameral, bipartisan watchdog to assess China's behavior against international human rights standards. But today's hearing is not about this commission. It is about the people in the People's Republic of China, the oppression they continue to endure, the hopes they continue to hold for a better future, the aspirations that they continue to fight for. The people gathered in Tiananmen Square in the spring of 1989 were demanding their government respond to their grievances as well as their aspirations. And the government's brutal response ended lives and ended optimism that day. But it did not end the desire for freedom. It did not end the desire for dignity. Those feelings are universal. They're innate to every human everywhere. It's a spark that cannot be extinguished. 35 years later, that brutal grip of oppression has only tightened. People cannot openly express dissent. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about whether and how the citizens of the PRC find ways to share frustrations and desires. Their use of social media or chat groups or informal networks. What can the 2022 white paper protests tell us? I also hope to hear how we, American policymakers, can best understand what people in China are saying, what they are feeling, what they are advocating for. It's vital that we listen to their voices rather than project our own ideas or politics. I'm interested to learn how people keep alive the legacy of Tiananmen in the face of a concerted and successful effort by the CCP to erase the history of Tiananmen, both on the mainland and now in Hong Kong. Preservation of memory is another innate human impulse, essential to people's ability to maintain their culture and maintain their identity. Freedom of expression and freedom of assembly are core human rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Chinese government's relentless effort to suppress them does not diminish the yearning of the people of China to realize them, or our responsibility to speak out for them. And that's why we are here, and that's why I look forward to your testimony. Is there anything else that anyone would like to weigh in and say before we turn to our witnesses?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Merkley, and thank you to Chair Smith as well for holding this important hearing, and thank you to our esteemed witnesses for taking the time to be here today to share your stories with us. I was 19 years old when the Tiananmen Square protests erupted, and I can still remember the infamous image of the tank man bravely staring down the military tanks with his grocery bags in hand. And I can still remember hearing the news about the thousands of protesters who lost their lives standing up to oppression. Now, on the 35th anniversary of the protests, the Chinese people are still prohibited from talking about Tiananmen and have faced reprisal from recent protests such as the White Paper movement. The Chinese government has cracked down on protesters both here and transnationally, which underscores the very important need for this hearing. We can honor the legacy of these courageous protesters by hearing these stories today and ensuring that they are remembered, despite efforts by the Chinese Communist Party to erase them from memory. With that said, I'm eager to hear from all of you and to discuss how this commission and Congress can support you in your fight for human rights, democracy, and freedom of speech in China. Thank you.
I will now introduce our witnesses, starting with Zhou Fengsuo, and I'll apologize for my pronunciation, however off it might be. Welcome. He was a Tiananmen student leader and is executive director of the Human Rights in China. In 1989, Zhou was a physics student at Tsinghua University in Beijing, who helped set up a broadcast station on Tiananmen Square and provided support and medical help to students who were on a hunger strike. Authorities took him into custody and detained him for a year without trial. After coming to the United States in 2007, he co-founded Humanitarian China to promote the rule of law, human rights, and freedom of expression in China, and to provide humanitarian support to political prisoners and their families. Since 2023, he serves as Executive Director of Human Rights in China. Turning next to Ruohui is a rights advocate and student, currently studying paralegal at Humber College in Canada. In 2020, he founded the Assembly of Citizens, a Chinese student association, which organized large-scale June 4th commemoration activities and white paper movement protests in Canada. Since 2022, he has been an assistant editor for China Spring, where he has strengthened the focus on Chinese human rights issues and political prisoners through his editorial work. Karen, an alias, a student at Columbia University who organized a campus white paper protest solidarity event in 2022. She will testify in disguise, as other organizers of the event were either attacked at Columbia or encountered intimidation by the PRC police. Rowena He is joining us by video. Is China specialist and historian of modern China at the University of Texas in Austin. Her focus is the nexus of history, memory, and power, and the relationship between academic freedom and public opinion, human rights and democratization, youth values, and nationalism. Her first book was entitled Tiananmen Exiles, Voices of the Struggles for Democracy in China. Mr. Zhou, we'll turn to you first.
Thank you, Senator Merkley. Thank you, Chris Smith, and thanks to CECC for organizing this hearing. I am Zhou Fengsuo, Fengsuo Zhou in English. I'm currently Executive Director of Human Rights in China and President, co-founder of Humanitarian China. I was a Tiananmen student leader 35 years ago. It is my honor and duty to testify today as a survivor of Tiananmen massacre. October 2022, I was at the Halloween parade with a group of young protesters. I was the only adult in the group for about 50. But look around, I know more among them than anyone else. Some of them were guests at my home. Some visited the Tiananmen exhibition. Some were kids of my fellow protesters from Tiananmen. I was really touched when one of them told me that he was arrested a few years ago on Tiananmen Square, commemorating Tiananmen massacre in the very place it happened, even though at that time nobody knew about this. As I was standing there, I was excited and inspired. And then, without my prompting, they chanted, "Down with CCP, down with Xi Jinping." At that moment, I was in tears. I realized that after 33 years, we are finally seeing the younger generation. They are stepping up to carry on the torch of freedom that I carried with me since 1989 from Tiananmen Square. In 1989, I was a physics student at Tsinghua University. I was among the first to protest on Tiananmen Square after Hu Yaobang's death. Hu Yaobang was a former party secretary of CCP, but his death signaled the death of reform in China. That's why we are concerned. That's why we went to Tiananmen Square to protest. And then, on this very day, 35 years ago, I was among the last to leave Tiananmen Square. When the tanks were rolling in, the soldiers were pointing guns at us, and one of the tanks was only 20 feet away from me. In between these 2 dates, I witnessed the most incredible outpouring of Chinese people in support of freedom and democracy. Millions of people gathered on Tiananmen Square from all walks of society. Not only students, but also journalists, communist government officials, Christians, Buddhist monks, even police and soldiers. It was also my first time meeting people from Hong Kong and witnessing their strong support and learn from them the techniques of civil society. The solidarity at that moment was so overwhelming, strong, and inspiring. I installed dozens of loudspeakers on the monument to the heroes at the center of the square. And for the first time, the people's real voices were heard, echoing across this huge plaza. At the very center of Communist China's political power. In that moment, many Chinese people who were fearful and quiet became expressive and articulate, sometimes even jubilant. Freedom was in the air. Democracy was almost within reach. Unfortunately, I also witnessed the brutal massacre of these peaceful protesters by the troops armed with tanks and machine guns. The pungent smell of tear gas, the bullet holes in the buildings, the rolling tanks, armored vehicles, and the dead bodies outside of the hospital in a bicycle shed because the hospital was so overwhelmed with these who were injured and killed. That was a war. It's a war conducted by CCP's invading army against freedom-loving Chinese. I remember seeing Zhou among these who died. He was a younger classmate of me at Tsinghua University. But he died for our shared dream of a free China. He was a third-year student studying instrument at Tsinghua University. I was shocked beyond belief. I couldn't comprehend what I was witnessing. I realized I must carry on his name and continue speaking out for his behalf. The protesters were not the only ones who suffered under the government's attacks. The military's brutal siege of the capital encountered outrageous, courageous resistance from people of Beijing. When martial law was first declared, millions of people poured out from their homes to block the troops. Many of them stood in front of the marching soldiers and the rolling tanks in order to protect students like me. Some of them carrying their children on their shoulders just to show the soldiers that Beijing was peaceful. This is why the world witnessed the great tankman, who has since become the most important icons of last century, representing courage against overwhelming power and violence. To date, I'm often asked who this tankman is. We probably will never know. Had he survived, he probably wouldn't even realize the significance of his move, because there were many like him who stood in front of the tanks. The whole world watched as the Chinese government turned against its own people and murdered peaceful protesters. Yet, President Bush sent in a special envoy to inform the butcher of Beijing, Deng Xiaoping, of the support of U.S. government, even after the senseless massacre. Within 10 days, probably, the CCP took the wrong path after 1989, setting the country on the trajectory of ever-increasing political repression and human rights violations. That is why later, this very regime would put Uyghurs in concentration camps, would force Tibetans into self-immolation, and would deprive Hong Kong of its freedom. If a regime can use tanks in broad daylight to kill its own people and still enjoy the support of the most democratic countries in the world, there's no limit to what it could do, both in terms of internal repression and external aggression. That's why we are seeing the China today. Domestically, CCP chose to erase the memories of the massacre through censorship and brutal repression. It tightened its grip on free speech, banning any mention of the reality of what happened on Tiananmen Square and in the rest of the country, to the extent that many young people today had never heard about it. 20 years later, after the death of my classmate Zhong Qing, his brother visited Tiananmen Museum in Hong Kong, and that was the first time he learned why his older brother died. This museum was shut down by CCP after the national security law. That's why we are building museums here. There's one in Manhattan. Perhaps in 1989, CCP could have taken a different path, transforming itself into a social democratic party, but the massacre and the crackdown eliminated the ability of this regime to be positively changed through mere trade and investment. United States government have deliberately put their heads in the sand, ignoring the cause of human rights activists and political prisoners in China. This strategy may have brought short-term gains in form of increased profit and lower inflation, but appeasing CCP for the benefit of trade has proven to be self-defeating and self-destructive. What Tiananmen told us 35 years ago till today. The most important lesson is that United States policy towards CCP regime must focus on the democratization of China. Without democratization, the regime will become even stronger threat toward universal values, including freedom and human rights. Okay, I'm running out of time. Okay, let me just quickly finish this. Today we remember Tiananmen because it reminds us of what a different China could have been, because Chinese people demonstrated their love for freedom and democracy through their protests and resistance. The fight didn't stop then. For most of us, it was only the beginning of our journey. Liu Xiaobo gave up a position as visiting scholar at Columbia University to go back to China to join the students on Tiananmen Square. He refused to leave China and died as the first and only Nobel Peace Laureate in prison without ever seeing the award. Xu Zhiyong was only a high school student, but the protest and the massacre awakened him. He resolved to dedicate his life to the dream of a free, democratic, and beautiful China. His New Citizens movement gained tens of thousands of followers from all over China. He was recently sentenced to 14 years in prison. For me personally, it has been a privilege to work with these amazing freedom fighters to raise awareness of their suffering, their sacrifice, their dreams, their goals, and to support Tiananmen mothers and the other victims of the Tiananmen massacre and the crackdown. Even though the Tiananmen protest and the massacre remain a source of trauma for Chinese people, it has simultaneously become a tremendous source of inspiration, healing, and hope. That's why I have collected many relics and artworks from 1989. Each of these items carry a story of life and death, of strength and endurance that is difficult to find anywhere. I have with me this blood-stained tower. This tower was made 1983. In the morning when we were leaving Tiananmen Square, someone was shot. This tower was used to wipe the blood of the person who was wounded. This is evidence of the murder. It's also a sign of hope and life, because this was kept for 33 years in China, very carefully against the government's surveillance for 2 generations, and gifted to me last year. This T-shirt was made by the students who created the very sculpture of goddess of democracy on Tiananmen Square. This was the reason millions of people protested on Tiananmen Square. Democracy and freedom for China. Thank you.
And is that what the Chinese writing is on the T-shirt, is democracy and freedom for China?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. And with your permission, I'll enter the balance of your testimony into the record.
Please.
Thank you. And I really appreciate how you have highlighted many individuals who, very courageous acts, have stood up for democracy and freedom. Thank you. Mr. Yang?
Hello, Mr. and Madam.
We'll have you turn on your microphone, please.
Hello. I just want to say I highly agree with my right honorable friend, Mr. Zhou, just said. The Chinese Communist Party has leased a war on its own people. So that's why I also brought this one with me. This medal was issued to those soldiers who shot students on Tiananmen Square 35 years ago. In normal nations, medals are given to the soldiers who's acting distinguishedly and brave on the battlefield against the enemy. But in China, the enemy, it appears to be its own people. It said commemorative of putting down the riot. Those soldiers get this medal not because of their bravery, but because they're coward. Not because fighting the enemy, but slaughter their own people. And my story begins 5 years ago. 5 years ago today, the 30th anniversary of June the 4th, I took the street for the first time, committing myself into the movement of democracy in China. I was deeply intimidated by the atmosphere of fear cultivated by the Chinese Communist Party in Canada. However, the 2019 Hong Kong anti-extradition movement has further secured my determination of engaging into the Chinese democracy movement. In Toronto, I have actively participated with my Hong Kong friends, organizing support on democracy movement, supporting the Hong Kong people. As someone from mainland China, I have faced huge pressure from my own community, dealing with psychological stress from the harassment of the communist supporters and also the suffering from political melancholy. Things that happened during the protest remind me that the national border cannot stop CCP from spreading fears overseas. Some Chinese, organized and encouraged by the consulate, drove their luxury cars through our protesting line and shouting insults. They burned our flowers at the Statue of Democracy. Some protesters even received death threatening. My life was full of harassment of the strangers. In 2020, Dr. Li Wenliang, the whistleblower of COVID-19 who could possibly stop this global catastrophe from happening, was arrested by the Chinese police of so-called spreading false statement and labeled as a criminal. He died shortly after due to the virus. But surprisingly, I witnessed many young Chinese students attend the memorial event we organized in downtown Toronto, which deeply moved me. I called on everyone to be organized and bound together to overcome the fear and despair and fight for a life of humanity, human rights, democracy, and freedom. This led the founding of our organization, Assembly of Citizens. Over 3 years of COVID-19, the young generation in China has suffered from other human rights disaster. During the White Paper Revolution in winter 2022, the Assembly of Citizens is capable to organize events and protest across Canada more professionally, more faster, as a group. Our friend in Europe became the mailbox of contributors and resistance fighters inside Great Firewall, becoming one of the most influential X accounts as Mandarin account. He collected testimony and stories for human rights catastrophes and told those stories has been neglected by the international society to millions of people every day and simultaneously facing the threats of the Communist Party. Our friend in U.S. is making movies, talk shows, and all forms of arts in order to spread the awareness of the oppression of human rights in China. Our friend in Japan and Korea is trying to establish creative business to emphasize resistance as a lifestyle. Through dealing with various issues, we realized how to avoid divisions, build professional organizations, and more inclusive and strong link with other groups. 29 years ago, in this very same Congressional Hall, Major General Charles Sweeney, who testified about the decision dropping the atomic bombs, used to say, "One can only forgive by remembering, and to forget is to risk repeating history." The last rapid deterioration of human rights under a major power is 1933 in Germany. That year, when they enacted the Enabling Act, which brought Germany under the dictatorship. In that year, Peter Drucker began writing his first book, The End of Economic Man, The Origins of Totalitarianism. Today, as we open this book, we feel if history is actually repeating itself. Let me adopt some of his words in today's situation in China. The Chinese substitute CCP for order when they cannot have a real order, and they worship Xi Jinping when they have no God to worship, showing its very intensity that they must have an order, a creed, a radical concept of man. Military intimidation against Taiwan, the suppression of freedom, persecution against LGBTQ groups, the re-education camps for Uyghurs and Tibetans, and the war against religion are signs of weakness instead of strength. The more desperate the Chinese become, the more strongly entrenched will totalitarianism appear to be. The further they push to totalitarian road, the greater will they despair. However, as soon as we offered an alternative, the whole totalitarian magic will vanish like a nightmare. This is the current situation in China, and this is our mission. We hope we can show all Chinese a new choice, a possibility for democracy and freedom lifestyle with dignity and the value of human rights. Therefore, I believe my colleagues can do their job well. I trust my predecessor from Tiananmen Square generation can cooperate effectively. I trust my allies can stand with us, and I also believe that you can make the right choice. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I truly appreciate for listening to my story. We're doing the best we can, but your help is necessary as well. After all, this future belongs to us, belongs to them, and belongs to you. Thank you.
Thank you much, and thank you for your advocacy and your courage in doing so. We're now going to turn to Karen. Welcome.
I would like to begin by expressing gratitude for the opportunity to testify disguise, even though it will only delay the inevitable police visit to my parents. Director Scott Phillips told me that only I could evaluate whether the cost of testifying is worth it. But however much this cost weighs on me, the cost for my fellow student activists who have already experienced intimidation, harassment, and even physical assault from CCP agents is 10 times greater. And for the record, all the names in my testimony will be aliases. I was born and raised in China. Like many Chinese students my age, I wonder about the conspicuous lack of events depicted between 1970 and 1990 in our history textbook. I only learned about June 4th by reading it on Wikipedia in high school. In 2022, I began an internship in Shanghai with one of China's largest technology conglomerates. Like many young people who grew up in the economic prosperity of the 2010s, sheltered by censorship, I was ready to bask in and contribute to the economic achievements of my nation. In March, an unexpected citywide lockdown began, and this would subsequently be remembered as one of the largest humanitarian crises in China's COVID response. The lockdown has made me realize that despite economic development, the Chinese Communist Party has not changed, even in 35 years from its totalitarian self. In November of 2022, after I returned to university, the fire in Urumqi sparked a global wave of vigils and protests to commemorate the victims. My friend and I organized a vigil at Columbia in front of the Law Library. We spread the word through social media only one day before the event. But to our surprise, not just 10 or 100, but 300 people showed up that night. The scene reminded me of how Chinese students at Columbia 35 years ago gathered at the very same place to demonstrate solidarity to students on the square. We wanted it to be a peaceful event, but my friend Ava, shortly after delivering her speech, was violently assaulted, struck right on her face for 3 times by an unidentified individual who claimed to be a Columbia student. Later, she turned to the Columbia administration, but no action was taken aside from a suggestion to seek mental health support, not even a campus safety alert. I was in a class on China's foreign policy. There were a few Chinese students whose comments were blatant CCP propaganda, like how the concentration camp does not exist. After the vigil, I was always afraid that those Chinese students would recognize me. I was afraid what happened to Ava at the protest was going to happen to me too, and that Columbia would just do nothing. As China reopened, the momentum of the white paper protest has died down gradually. My friends and I at Columbia has tried to preserve the spark by continuing to organize events like movie screenings of COVID documentaries and panel discussions. However, we were always plagued by far-reaching transnational repression. My friend and co-organizer, Chris, was interrogated by Chinese police when he returned to China last year. He reached out to me on Instagram to inquire about the names of participants of the New York protests. I was informed that he sent those inquiries under police pressure. The CECC has done an extraordinary job in its 2023 report in documenting the CCP's transnational repression, especially those faced by the Uyghur and Hong Kongers. But I want to bring to your attention that even though the white paper movement has subsided, the intensity of transnational repression against outspoken Chinese overseas students has only escalated. In most cases, through personal harassment, transnational surveillance, and the coercion of proxies, meaning the intimidation and interrogation of family members in China. My fellow student activists experienced this retribution in ever-increasing quantities and severity this year. Yet, unlike Hong Kong or Uyghur activists, few can step forward and tell their story. According to Colombia's own website, it has approximately 6,000 currently enrolled Chinese students in 2023. Many of them, after completion of their study, will return to China and work in occupations of political or economic importance. As a social science major, I have always believed that a change in society starts with a change in its citizens' mind. In fact, many vocal individuals of the white paper movement in China were educated overseas. Exposure to freedom made us free. But if these brilliant minds cannot even think and speak freely on American campuses, on American soil, then it will be much more difficult for a movement like white paper to be sparked again. I don't have time to go through the policy recommendation in my testimony, but I would like to receive questions on them later if possible. Congress members, 160 years ago, President Lincoln showed us America was a nation that would hold the power and bear the responsibility to assure freedom to the free. He said, as Americans, we shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. That is our union. That is our beacon of liberty for those oppressed around the world. Congress members, 35 years ago, you showed those students from Beijing fleeing a brutal massacre that the United States kept its promise as the last best hope of earth, a safe haven for people who pursue and fight for democracy and freedom. Now I ask you to show the compassion and support for us. For those first pioneers who light the spark for all should not be allowed to freeze in the wind and snow.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and we're now going to have testimony from Rowena He, who is joining us by video. Members have various hearings, briefings, and votes, so we are coming and going, and I apologize that that is the nature of how the House and Senate operate. So I'm going to turn the gavel over to my colleague from the House.
At this time, I'd like to recognize Rowena He for their opening comments. Rowena He, I know you're remote, so we'll be video conferencing in this portion of your testimony. Feel free to proceed once you've made a connection. As we do an audio check here, I just want to say Rowena He is joining us by video. She is a China specialist, a historian of modern history at the University of Texas in Austin. Her focus is on the nexus of history, memory, and power, and the relationship between academic freedom and public opinion, human rights and democratization, and the youth values and nationalism. Her first book was entitled Tiananmen Exiles, Voices of the Struggle for Democracy in China. Rowena, we're very honored to have you with us today and look forward to your testimony. As we work through our audio assistance, I'll recognize the Senator for opening comments, and then we'll come back for Q&A with the panel. Thank you very much for being here today. With that, Senator.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the witnesses for their courage, their testimony, and bravery. And now, in my view, Mr. Chairman, some of this, the fact that you have to be even brave in America, as Karen has shown, is a real troubling aspect of what's happening right now with regard to the Chinese Communist Party's attempts at global reach to suppress dissent, even trying to depress dissent in the United States. You know, this anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre is something that most Americans who are alive then, we all remember it. And unlike what the Chinese Communist Party has tried to do to its own people, they have not been able to erase the memory of those horrendous events in the United States or around the world. I am actually just back from a Senate CODEL with Senator Butler and some other senators, a bipartisan Senate CODEL from Taiwan. And this is a real free society, one of the freest societies in the world. And of course, it is culturally, it is Chinese, which is why the CCP is so scared about what's happening in Taiwan. Like Hong Kong, the way Hong Kong was, Taiwan threatens the very central tenet of the Chinese Communist Party's ruling ethos, which is one man ruling in perpetuity by crushing all dissent, knows what's good for 1.4 billion people. That is why they're so afraid of Taiwanese democracy. I want to thank the witnesses again, Mr. Chairman, here, and to recognize also what is one of the most outrageous Chinese Communist Party offenses, and that is how they systemically, regularly target dissidents abroad and their families to make them comply with what they see as correct behavior. And as we are seeing by these brave witnesses today, they're even doing this in the United States of America, hunting down dissidents in the United States of America. I think every single American citizen should be outraged by this. And again, I want to thank our witnesses today for their courage. We stand with them, and I look forward to them taking their questions and getting the word out, not just to American citizens, but to people all around the world on the brutality of this authoritarian regime in Beijing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Could not agree more with well-placed opening statements. With that, I'd like to return to one of our key witnesses, Rowena He, who is now available for us remote. Rowena, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you hear me now? I hope. Thank you so much for this opportunity to join you from remote in solidarity. I'm currently at Stanford because I wanted to honor my commitment that I made a long time ago to speak for the Tiananmen anniversary today, June 4th. And as you all know that this is a special day because exactly today, 35 years ago, over 200,000 army soldiers equipped with AK-47s and tanks were deployed into the capital city of Beijing. I was a teenager at that time, and I always wonder if the world know what's happening to us. I know that many of my friends, my college friends, that we used to light candles secretly, closing doors and windows, worrying about being caught. They are also listening to me today from afar. So it means a lot that CECC is organizing this and giving us a voice on this special day when those hope, when those idealism of my generation was so violently silenced in 1989. 10 years ago, when I first testified for CECC, I just published my book. I was teaching at Harvard. I was sad and I was still hopeful, especially after a Tiananmen father hanged himself in an empty parking lot before before the anniversary. And then I felt so sad at that time because I used to listen to his testimony all the time as a scholar of Tiananmen, and he was so determined to live on and carry on for justice for his son Ya Aiguo. But I kept wondering what was in his mind when he was walking towards that empty parking lot near Tiananmen Square. That's probably the closest place that he could get to the square where his son was killed. And I kept wondering what he was thinking. At that time, that was the rising China. That was the time when the whole world was mesmerized by the power and the wealth of the CCP and all talking about the China model of this state capitalism and authoritarianism. I think that he probably felt that there's nothing in this world that he had except his own life to remind us that we owe his son a justice. And I wanted so much to be able to give him that justice when I was at Harvard. That was 10 years ago. 5 years ago, I was invited to testify for CECC again when I was in London. I couldn't make it. And at that time, I just finished my fellowship at Princeton and just accepted a professorship in Hong Kong. And of course, now 5 years later, 35th anniversary of Tiananmen, I was being denied the work visa and banned from returning to my position as associate professor of history at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I think Tiananmen was not just about the past. Tiananmen is ongoing. The repression, the political suppression is ongoing. The mothers are still not allowed to openly mourn their children. And the exiles are not allowed to go home to their parents' sick bed and funerals. And scholars like me are constantly being punished. We are in freedom, we are outside China now, but we are never free. It pains me to watch those younger people just now before me, they testify about the repression, about the fear, about the harassment to their family members, because that's exactly what we've been through. If there's any one thing that keep me going, it's not about courage that people often describe me. It's because of the fear. It's because of the fear that we had lived through, especially after 1989. And it's because of that fear that I wanted to continue. I wanted to carry on. The past 35 years was a war of memory against forgetting. The CCP has used all the state machinery to erase the history and memory. And Hong Kong, that I just got expelled, used to be the beacon of light for those of us struggling in darkness for life for 30 years. Because every year in Victoria Park, you would know that no matter how difficult it is, my journey to study Tiananmen, how depressing, how daunting it was, you know that on the day of June 4th, today, for 30 years, people in Hong Kong would light the candles in Victoria Park, telling the regime that there's something that you cannot crush by guns and tanks and propaganda machines and jails. That's our human beings longing for freedom and justice. But now the organizers of these candlelight vigils are either in exile or in jail. The last court trial that I went to before I left Hong Kong was actually for the trial of one of the organizers of the Tiananmen candlelight vigil. I had imagined so many times before I went to court how I would react, how I would feel when I saw my friends being on the other side of the courtroom. But when I saw them, when I saw them coming out, Albert Hall, Lei Chao-yan, all these men who used their life to organize the candlelight vigils for us, lighting candles to show those of us in darkness that we are still here. We are not giving up. And now they are on that side of the courtroom and I'm on the other side. That strong sense of helplessness was just so overwhelming. Just the same as like a few months ago, before their court trial, the statue of the goddess of democracy was removed from my campus at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Twice in my life, first time in my teenager year, the second time as a middle-aged woman, as professor on campus, trying to protect and defend academic freedom on my campus and protect the younger generation of Hong Kong and China when they were trying to struggle for their fight for freedom and democracy. And twice we saw that Statue of Liberty that the students first erected in Tiananmen Square, trying to symbolizing our generation's longing for the same Statue of Liberty as you have in New York City. So Tiananmen was not just about repression, it's also about hope. It's about the whole generation's longing for universal values. And that fateful night, that repression that changed that changed everything. That we are still trying to carry on the fight. I think it's because of all these repressions that Congressman Smith mentioned at the beginning, and also my previous testimony colleagues that they had testified. I think it makes it even more important that we continue this fight. People used to ask me why human rights in China matters. They said that we have the voters' interest, we have economic interest. I fully understand how important it is for each of us, every of us, especially under the difficult economic situation, to bring food to their family. That's what everyone wanted. But Tiananmen was not just about China. It's not just about 1989. The violation of human rights in China can be the violation of human rights to everyone. If we look at what happened during COVID, the violation of human rights of one medical doctor in Wuhan in China became the violation of human rights of every single human being on earth. So 1989 did not end in 1989. It's an ongoing struggle. If there's anything we can do, then as William Quintana said it all, the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. And in 1984, we knew that those who control the present control the past, and those who control the past control our future. Let's work together collectively to make sure that government in Beijing cannot control our present and control our past and control our future. I know that we may lose many battles, but we are going to win the war of justice and truth. History is going to be on our side, and I'm happy to answer questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor He, for that powerful testimony. With that, I'd next like to recognize Senator for her opening comments, and then we'll get into comment and question.
Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to address such an esteemed panel. It's interesting to me that we mark this moment and anniversary with declaration of courage, also marked with a great deal of sadness. But what inspires me is that we sit in this moment listening to the fear and concerns, but also underneath the expectation and hope. And the work of this committee, I think, is a critical part of meeting those expectations of hope with these activists and leaders, academics across the country and the world. I believe that together, as has been declared, we can meet the moment of expectation and hope by continuing to commemorate the sacrifice of so many in 1989, but making that commemoration with a very loud demand, a demand for justice and truth and freedom. I know that as a part of this committee, I stand with all of my colleagues in meeting that moment in such a way. Mr. Chairman, I just have a few questions, if that would be okay. Mr. Zhou, thank you for your bravery in being here today and sharing your story. As one who knows truly the firsthand consequences of speaking out on human rights, your perspective and your insights are especially valuable to us. One thing that particularly interests me is how you have work to unite those who focus on the overall human rights picture in China and those who focus on the specific concerns of the Uyghur and Tibetan communities. Can you tell me a little bit more about how your work with the Uyghur and Tibetan communities has gone and how you think, how you've been effective in developing the cooperation amongst these groups?
Thank you, Senator Butler. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for your kind words of support, solidarity. I have worked extensively with Tibetan communities and Uyghur activists in the past. Of course, we always want to do more. The Tibetan community has been our strongest supporter from 35 years ago to date. They participate in our commemoration rallies everywhere. And I normally go to their celebrations, their events regularly. And we have a very active community for cultural exchange among the diaspora communities. So with that, we have tremendous respect for the Tibetan community. They have grown their roots very deeply in the host countries, and they have practiced democracy in their diaspora. Both of these aspects are what we are trying to learn, and we are actually getting a lot of help from them. For example, sometimes when we want to have events, our organizations are just at early start. They will give us space to hold these kind of events, and we are forever grateful. And my organization, Humanitarian China, was one of the earliest supporter of the Uyghur economist, Professor Turti Ilihamu, when his daughter, Zhou, arrived at the United States because her father was arrested at the airport. She was here alone. We raised money among our supporters to support her transition. She is my dear friend since then. And I also talk continuously with the Uyghur community. We are very outspoken on concentration camps and other issues. For me, of course, it was when I was in prison that I began to realize that I was in the same situation as all these underprivileged group under CCP. We were brainwashed to believe that we were like the prized child of the CCP regime. But then we, in prison, we realize how brutal this regime is against people. And once you are in that kind of situation, we feel the bond with the other underprivileged groups. And it's always my hope that we can do more. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. As a labor leader in California representing one of the most diverse communities across our state, what I hear in your response is tools that have been most effective and I think is applicable as we continue to meet this moment is the experience of shared pain and common humanity, but most importantly, the aspirational purpose that unites us all, no matter what community, and I appreciate you for lifting those tools up as we all work together to broaden this coalition, to bring more voices to this incredibly important issue. My last question, if I can, Mr. Chair, just to quickly, would be to Mr. Yang. I've always believed that young people should be empowered to advocate for change as they seek to shape the future in which they will live. So I'm pleased to learn about your efforts to organize students around the world in advocating for human rights in China. Can you share with us your view on the younger generation of Chinese citizens, both within and outside the country, and the perspective may be different from their parents' or grandparents' generation? I'd love to hear the sort of intergenerational perspective of leaders within the community relative to this issue.
Thank you, ma'am. First of all, about my family, my father generation, pretty much my father and my mother and my grandparents were really, really loyal to Communist Party members. So they'll be really unhappy to see me being here. But generally, the condition in China right now is really desperate. Even at this very moment when we're having this committee right now, someone in mainland China might just on the way to suicide because of the terrible, terrible economic atmosphere in China right now. And the entire society is really desperate, especially for young people. The rates of suicidal rates in mainland China, I believe is included in my 9-page written testimony. You can take a look later. It's really high right now. So that's really a catastrophe. Additionally, overseas, we're really glad to see there's various groups in Europe, in Japan, in America, all over the place. Currently, I'm trying to establish communication and cooperation with these groups and these peoples that are really helping, really encouraging that we are really showing the solidarity. But we might be having a little bit different agendas as the Tiananmen Square generations. We're trying to be more creative, utilize the modern technology as well as we can. And we are more focusing on the basic human rights. We do not have those prejudice or those privilege to talk about the future of the Asia, the shape of the world, because right now, due to the atmosphere is so desperate, majorly our goal is just help as many people as possible, at least save their lives, like LGBTQ groups, like those students who's being persecuted during the White Paper Revolution. We somehow would like to return to the basic and restructure our society as a more civilized, more democracy, and with the value of humanity and dignity from the beginning, one step by step. And I have myself full confidence that we shall complete this task really quick.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Commissioner. Senator Butler. Excellent line of questioning. With that, I would now like to defer the chair to the Speaker Emeritus, Representative Nancy Pelosi. Madam Speaker.
It's wonderful to hear. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee. No. And to our guests, our student leaders, our leaders for human rights and democracy in China, thank you for your participation. Thank you for your ongoing courage. Because unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, that is what it is taking at this time, because the Chinese have a very long hand outside of the country. I was just in Hong Kong, in UK and London, where they had reached there to show their disagreement with the courage, against the courage of those speaking out in Hong Kong. But here we are, 35 years later. You were not born yet. Maybe some of your parents weren't even born yet, I don't know. But in any event, it was an event that shocked the world, because in living TV, unlike many things that had happened before, we could see a beautiful demonstration of courage, of the statue, a statue modeled after the Statue of Liberty, giving respect of the people in Tiananmen Square. And there were people in hundreds of other cities, I understand, at least 100 other cities, who had come out to speak for democratic freedoms, also for the end of corruption. There were several items on the agenda. And there were leaders in the Chinese government who were supportive and sympathetic to the cause. They were soon rejected. But first, the Chinese rolled tanks over these young people. Many died, others were arrested. Some who escaped came here to Congress. I remember the first day, some of them came here. The press of the world was focused on what they had to say. So this attention that this commission is paying here today is very, very important, because we cannot let anyone think that those champions of Tiananmen Square are forgotten. As we speak, there is a genocide occurring against Muslims in China. As we speak, there is repression in Tibet of culture, religion, and language, so that children have to leave Tibet to be raised in their culture. As we speak, the Chinese government, I make that distinction from the Chinese people, the Chinese government, the Communist Party, has made a mockery of one country, two systems by the suppression that we see in Hong Kong to destroy their democratic freedoms. They're in contradiction to the basic law, which they agreed to when UK handed Hong Kong back over to China. What kind of an argument is that to the world, that they are truly one country, two systems? What kind of a case is that to make to Taiwan when they are threatening aggression, not only to Taiwan, but in the South China Sea? So what has happened in China under the circumstances of the past 35 years has not been positive in terms of global democracy, in terms of human rights, in terms of promoting democratic freedoms. We don't expect them to have a democratic government, but democratic freedoms and a freedom to speak, very important. And so it is, I say this in China, and I say it at the highest level, the highest level there. We as Americans, if we do not speak out in recognizing the violations of human rights and democratic freedoms in China because of commercial interest, we lose all moral authority to speak out about human rights in any country in the world. This is a challenge to our conscience as a country. The man before the tank was a symbol of such great courage, not only his, but of all the others in Tiananmen Square, and of yours for speaking out now, student leaders and leaders of human rights and democracy in China for speaking out now. I just wanted to, as the writer Lu Xun wrote, lies written in ink cannot disguise facts written in blood. I just want to say that China is trying to deny some of this. When I was there a few years after Tiananmen Square, I said to some of the leaders in the government, there's a rumor that China is trying to revisit Tiananmen Square and change your attitude toward what happened there, maybe free the prisoners and the rest. And they said to me, you're right, it's a rumor. It's a rumor. But we must remember what happened at Tiananmen because China continues to deny history. One of my proudest possessions is the poster of the man before the tank. It's beautiful, a picture of courage. But not only that, it's signed by almost every dissident who has made his or her way out of China. Signatures of courage. But I was saddened to learn on a subsequent visit after we unfurled the banner in Tiananmen Square, remembering those who gave their lives. That was early 90s, but subsequent to that, when I went there and was speaking at the universities, what was sad for me was to learn that most of the students hadn't the faintest idea of what that poster was, the man before the tank. Was that a commercial for a product in America? They had tried to erase that iconic image and what it stood for. as far as young people are concerned in China. So this is not only wrong, it's mean-spirited because it tries to erase the history. But we cannot forget, and we will not let the history be forgotten. And that's why I'm so grateful to the committee for your work. And I thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts about this really important 35th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We appreciate you joining us.
Can I jump in to respond to the questions too on the line or?
Yeah, Professor Hu, if you want to jump in, this will be your time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so thank you so much, Congressman Pelosi. It means a lot to see you here today with everyone else. And I fully agree with you that a government that deployed over 200,000 army soldiers, with AK-47s and tanks and against unarmed civilians in this capital city should not have any legitimacy. And the post-Tiananmen regime, they created this narrative that we are doing this for you, telling the Chinese people that we are doing this because otherwise we won't have this rising China narratives. I think that's where the war of history and memory against forgetting is coming in. And I think that as we all know, public opinion about democratization and nationalism and even war is all closely connected to the collective memory of the nation's most immediate past. So I think this war is not just about getting justice and getting the truth, but also powerfully have strong, profound implications on public opinion, those domestically and internationally. I think that the CCP has been extremely successful using democracy to undermine democracy. When we try to keep this balance in democracy, I taught in American campuses and of course later in Hong Kong campuses, we always face these challenges of having the balance of the diversity, allowing different voices, but also when you're facing all these propagandas instilled by the CCP, it's very difficult it's a challenge for democracy. And of course, like as I mentioned at the beginning, I myself, after living through both Tiananmen in China and 2019 with my students in Hong Kong and then banned as a Tiananmen scholar from returning to China, is already very telling that they are afraid that people know the historical past. They are so afraid that that's why the patriotic education campaign, the post Tiananmen period, they emphasize all the wars, the Opium War, the Japanese invasion, but then they totally did not mention, or they twisted and manipulated the historical memory of every atrocity that the CCP was responsible. So I think that this is something that we need to think about harder in terms of policy, what we can do on our American campuses. And the second thing, forgive me if I'm, you can tell me if I'm going over that. So about the what we can do to engage, I think there's something lost in translation. Often people in this country think that engagement, meaning, of course, Fengsuo is doing great work, like all the human rights organizations, but we also need to recognize the fact that under the CCP, any organizations, any formal official organizations, you'll be immediately be banned and then you'll be targeted. So I think, I hope that people also see those who are invisible but doing groundwork on the ground. I felt this especially strongly when I was working in Hong Kong after 2019, the past few years. You need to be low profile, but then you're still doing things. There are so many people who are invisible, but they are doing very important work on the ground. So maybe we can think about how to support these people as well as organizations, not just social medias. I can easily find that the social media has been so quiet after the passing of the Article 23 in Hong Kong, but it doesn't mean that people are not resisting. They have their own way to resist and to express themselves. And still, I can continue for more, but thank you so much for the opportunity to share my views.
Thank you, Professor He. Speaker Pelosi, do you have any further questions for the commission? Otherwise, we'll continue with the line.
Just to pick up from what we just heard, everybody says to me, well, what are you going to do about China? It's a big country. We're a big country. We have to find our common ground. There are areas that we must try to work together on. If we're going to solve the climate crisis, for example, we have to try to find some common ground there and some areas of respect. But that doesn't mean that we ignore what has happened before. So we have to be true to our values, be true to our priorities, and be respectful of the people of China, and not to equate them with the Chinese Communist Party regime and the rest, and to recognize the, when President Xi came to the United States, not this time for APEC, but before, Senator Feinstein, my dear former friend and colleague of the senators who are here, she and I spoke to him about Tibet in particular. We talked about China, but in particular, and he said, well, when it comes to Tibet, you don't even know what you're talking about. You should go there. Things are great there. You just don't know. You should go. So I said, Mr. President, I've been trying to get a visa to go to Tibet for 25 years. Does this mean we have a visa to go to Tibet? So we went to Tibet, and it was like a Potemkin village. You know, they had tried to make it look as if people were just as happy as can be to have their culture diluted, their language forbidden, their religion mocked, and their people tortured for even the thought or the mention of the Dalai Lama. And so we told him when we went to Beijing after that visit, Jim McGovern said to him, we saw your Potemkin village of Tibet, because it wasn't real. And time prevents me from going into all of the unrealities of it. But again, it's a big country. We're a big country. We want to find a future together that has global security. Again, our values respected because they respect in their governance their own people. That wouldn't be possible without the courage of our guests here, our testimony here today. Thank you so much for that. So I don't really have a question except to say, when people say we can't ignore them, no, we can't ignore China. We have to find our common ground, but that common ground has to be about respect. Thank you,
I'd like to
Mr.
thank the
Chairman.
lady from California, and thank you, Congresswoman,
Thank you.
for your
Thank
advice
you.
and your perspective on this.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Thank you.
I want to return to the commission here and say how honored I am both to chair this and to the great work that Chairman Smith has done to also bring this team together on the 35th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. Today we're holding important hearings to highlight not only the demonstrations that occurred over 3 decades ago, but the challenge that continues. I remember being a child and watching on NBC News as the anchor highlighted this gentleman here. Mm-hmm. Standing as a beacon, not just to the individuals of China against standing up to tyranny, but really a world at the precipice, facing down both communist China and the Soviet Union and their proxies around the world. And here, no more than anywhere else, we saw the first breaches in that horrible wall of communism's takeover of a world. For those of you who are here today, both those who were on the ground when it happened and those who continue to be a voice for democracy and human rights, we are so grateful for your experiences and your voice. And we recognize that there is much more that needs to be done. As we gather here today, we not only remember the brave individuals who stood up in the name of democracy in 1989 in the streets of Beijing, but also to examine ways in which the CCP maintains a stranglehold on free speech throughout that country and exports it around the world today, including its detrimental effect and intimidation factor right here in the United States on U.S. soil today, as one of our witnesses is exemplifying. This commission has examined time and time again Xi Jinping's brutal rule and has turned the clock backwards on the people of China. And despite the victories won in '89, we have seen the sun continue to set. His desire to crush political dissidents, silent opposing ideologies, threaten those who would challenge his power, signifies that China has descended into a near total authoritarian dystopia. This overwhelming suppression is not limited to immediate threats to Xi's power, but rather transcends decades of opposing and intolerable narratives. As we have learned today, the inability for those in mainland China to discuss the 1989 Tiananmen Square demonstration showcases the length in which the CCP will go, not only to whitewash history, but to bury those, literally in some cases, who disagree with the party. It's critical that we understand why the CCP continues to silence the story of Tiananmen Square and identify the tactics in which they're doing to repress speech today. So I applaud this commission for working together, not only in a bipartisan, bicameral way and with the White House, but to give voice to those who have been silenced. I want to thank our witnesses for your bravery, for appearing here today, and I'd like to get in the line of question. So with it, I'd like to begin with Dr. Zhou Fengsuo. During these protests, as are highlighted behind me, you helped set up the broadcast station to echo your beliefs and help keep fellow demonstrators up to date on what was happening real time on the ground in a country where free speech, let alone coordinated speech, was nearly impossible. As a young student, walk us through your thought process on the opposing work that you had done to stand up to China leading up to it and including the day of events in Tiananmen Square.
I was a physics student, but I was a voracious reader. I read lots of English literature. I was inspired by the famous speeches and documents. My first speech on Tiananmen Square was comparing Declaration of Independence against the Chinese Constitution, which I believe is arbitrary and dictatorial. It's not really from people's consent, like what the Declaration of Independence was showing to us. But at that time, I was pushed away after my speech because the student organizers on the Tiananmen Square believe I was too radical. Only in prison, when I studied Chinese law, so-called law, I realized just talking about the illegitimacy of the Constitution is a crime by itself. That's why the other people were scared. But for me, this was a moment I realized, even though it was a scare thought, the moment I shared it, it makes such a difference in me and in the people around me. That's why Tiananmen Square is like a magnet for so many people from different walks of society. Even though before that they were so fearful.
Mr. Zhou, the same intimidation that you felt in 1989 China, we're now more than 3 decades on. You look at individuals in the country, does that same level of intimidation persist? Is it pervasive under Xi's current CCP?
It's even stronger now. At that time, we all believed that technology would change China to a better direction. But unfortunately, what happened is exactly the opposite. CCP used the most sophisticated technology to monitor people, to force people into self-censorship. And that's not happening only in China, it's happening abroad as well. So that has proven to be one of the most devastating ways of the technology and how it happened. But on the other hand, there are always brave people who are fighting against this. At the moment we are speaking, there's this the Twitter account of Teacher Li on Twitter. The very tweet about today in Beijing that Human Rights in China wrote for him is receiving 1.6 million hits, and most of these are people from China. On this very single topic, like this is like 15 hours after its publication. It showed people's will. They are very interested in this. They have to overcome all the difficulties and risk a lot just to access this information. But as this day, they are not forgetting. They are trying to remember.
Thank you, Mr. Zhou, and applaud the bravery not only of the folks inside of China, but as you noted, the bravery continues outside of China. And challengingly, the use of electronics has actually put many of them on the target list. And so I'd like to turn to Karen here. Karen, you have worked hard to continue to call out the hypocrisy, not only within China, but the threat it has to folks right here on U.S. soil. Your work calling out China's zero COVID policy illustrates the broader context of the CCP's desire to maintain control over a population well beyond the shores of Beijing's territorial integrity, but to intimidate folks like yourself right here on U.S. territory. You can highlight here the complete lockdown of an entire country of over 1 billion people but yet they still had resources to come after you. Karen, share your story with us and how this suppression and tracking extends far beyond China's coastline.
Yes, so thank you for your question, Representative. I would like to
Can you make sure your mic's on for us?
I would like to begin by saying that I personally hasn't experienced any direct intimidation or harassment, but many of my friends and more this year are experiencing intimidation, harassment, interrogation. When they're here, they might just got a call from their parents asking them to hop onto a Zoom call, and then on the window of the Zoom call, next to their parents, they will see the face of CCP police ready to interrogate them unexpectedly. And part of the reason that I'm testifying in disguise is because I was afraid what happened to my friend Ava is going to happen to me again. But the larger reason as to why I'm afraid is actually has more to do with not knowing what's going to happen to me. I don't know if I'm going to get punched in the face for 3 times like Ava got tomorrow, or be like the girl from the Berkeley School of Music who received threatening message that her hands is going to get chopped off for just doing the vigil at the school. And in Colombia, a school with massively influential CSSAs and almost 7,000 Chinese students, I think there will always be this feeling of uncertainty as to when and from whom and in what format the retaliation or transnational repression is going to happen.
Well, Karen, to both you and your colleagues, we salute not only your bravery, but your steadfast commitment to calling out truth to power, whether it's here in the United States or overseas. I'd now like to call on Professor Rowena He. Identify for us, Professor, you're coming to us remote here, but you've seen from your work CCP suppression both inside mainland China and that tradition of censorship now spilling over. The CCP has influence over the Chinese diaspora as well as political activists here in the United States. What have you been able to identify how they've carried this out beyond Beijing's immediate threshold of control?
Okay, thank you so much, Congressman. I think that most of for decades, I lived with the fear. So people often ask me what are the difficulties of doing Tiananmen or any banned, forbidden memory taboo subjects by the Beijing regime. So I think first of all was the fear, right? So you as I mentioned earlier, because I think this is a problem in the whole China field now, not just me, and maybe also for journalists reporting from China or outside China. If you want to do a good job with integrity, that would mean that you are very likely to lose that access to the country to do your work. So that's the implications again is profound. That they have this control. It's almost like impossible. So how is it possible that you are studying something, but this something is going to control your access to everything? So you do a good job and then you lose your job, as I mentioned at the beginning. So I think we need to figure out what we can do about this. The academic freedom, intellectual freedom is at core of any inquiry. So the CCP has been doing this. The whole post-1889 relationship between the state and the state power and ordinary powerless individuals like me is always been, they had everything to control you, and they usually do not resolve the political issues or social issues that you raised. Instead, they silence the people who raised those issues, like people like Liu Xiaobo, Charter 08. We saw that very well. 2008, that was one of the first times that people tried to publicly ask for political change, transformation again. And of course, as Fengsuo mentioned at the very beginning, he became the second Nobel Peace Prize laureate, died as a political prisoner. So that kind of implications on individuals is profound, and we need to find a way to protect people, including myself. When I first returned from the battlefield, that's how I call it, being banned, I don't even know what's going to happen to me and what's going to happen to my family. And I think each of us, people like Fengsuo, us, we can tell you a story about how our loved ones were dying and how sad we were that we realizing that we would not be able to be next to our loved ones when they die. So Tiananmen is just not about politics. It's not even just about facts. It's also about humanity. It's also about values. And the CCP has tried to twisting all these values and changing the narrative. And I think that we are facing this big crisis that if they take over the public opinion about the China model, and then that's an alternative because democracy is in crisis as well, then we would be really in crisis. I feel like I'm now being exiled officially after studying Tiananmen for over 2 decades. This is my only home democracy. I hope that we can safeguard and preserve democracy because I don't know where I would be able to go without this. And this is where we all should protect and safeguard, I think. And maybe if I can take just 1 minute to respond to your question about the 1980s, the Tiananmen generation. So we were a generation in what I call in-betweenness. We were born towards the end of the Mao's Cultural Revolution, and then we growing up during Deng's open and reform era. That's why we will have this in-betweenness. On one hand, we believe in the importance of sacrificing for this ideals, important cause. At the same time, we were exposed to individualistic new ideas. So that reflected in the 2 songs sing throughout the Tiananmen movement in 1989. The first one was the Communist Party's International, and then the second one was the rock singers, Choi Jian's Nothing to My Name. So people often ask me, how is it possible that the students were singing the Communist International when they fall in front of the communist machine guns? So that's how I call the betrayal of loyalty. But I don't think the white paper generation has that kind of illusions about the regime. And maybe we don't see any cracks now, but I think the hope lies in the future generation, the engagement with the future generation. I think that they know better what the regime is capable of, and that's where the hope. We may not be able to tell right before it happened. Any major historical events before it happened, people would tell you it's impossible, but even including the Berlin Wall. But after that happened, people would tell you that that's inevitable. So with that, I think that we leave a note of hope with the future generation present today that testify together with us. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Professor Rowena He. I'd now like to turn, as was noted here, the generation of the Tiananmen Square to where we are now inside China. Mr. Yang, you have been a journalist. You have been on the front lines both covering and reporting this, and you are part of a new generation of individuals standing up for free speech. To what extent do you think the Tiananmen massacre influenced your generation of Chinese students, and has censorship fueled the type of threat that was talked about by other members on the panel today? And to what extent would you recommend change?
Thank you, sir. So first of all, the Tiananmen Square massacre to our new generation, I've been talking about this conversations with many of my colleagues. And to many of us, the most surprising part and most encouraging part of the Tiananmen Square massacre is we're not really surprising by those bloodshed that has been conducted by Communist Party, because we already witnessed what's happening in Tibet, what's happening with Uyghurs, what's happening in Hong Kong. So we kind of have a prepare on how brutal the Communist Party could possibly be. And for many of us, like new generation, when we first learned about the Tiananmen Square massacre, the most surprising part is not the brutal murder and slaughter. It's actually, we are really surprising about that our nation once have a time was so close to freedom, was so close to broke the chain of thousands, millennial years of the dictatorship and autocracy. And we are really being encouraged that to make us to believe that this land still have a hope, these people are trustworthy, but the only circumstances is just the atmosphere was really being manipulated by Communist Party, so we're not really able to observe and witness the real circumstances in China right now. But the main goal is we are still being inspired and really confident about the future of this land and to our people. And additionally, sorry, what's the second question again?
Aspects that you've seen for reform or holding the Chinese Communist Party accountable, either in your reporting or speaking out against it.
Right. So currently, we do have lots of case studies and experience that has been harassed and intimidated by the Chinese Communist Party overseas. Especially for someone like me, we decide to openly against the Communist Party. We do have lots of pressure, lots of intimidation, sometimes really harmful, traumatized we need to go through. So that's why we are currently including the proposal I've been brought in my 9-page reports to you, that we are doing the best we can to trying to seek the resources to reestablish a safe space, a public zone with democracy and the value of humanity. In that case, we can help the colleagues, members, or people in our community to rehabilitate from these traumatized. So that's one of the most important steps we need to take, and to walk away from those traumatized and move on.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. We heard about the physical violence, the intimidation occurring here in the United States. You've reported from Canada. Tell us what the transnational threat coming from the CCP, including places in Canada, have had an impact on communities there.
Right, absolutely. I just have a case that's coming up, like I believe a couple of weeks before. One of my friends in London, which is a city in Ontario, I brought this to my attention that the whole story is they have like a festival in a college, and someone brought a Korean flag there and tried, like many of the Chinese students was really upset about this scenario. So in that case, he think like, you guys cannot do this, like this is discrimination. And he was like being seriously bullied by those Chinese nationalists. And those which we call pinky or patriarchies of the Communist Party, communist lovers, or etc. They really have some really serious threatening against my friend and trying to really intimidate him. So we are currently still on the procedure working with the RCMPs and Canadian police to deal with these kind of circumstances right now. And besides that, I have personally experienced lots of swearing and intimidations from the Mandarin-speaking community in Toronto. Besides that, one of the most shocking part is what I mentioned in my speech, is that 2019, we put a plastic flower as a memorial for the Tiananmen Square massacre 30 years. And that location is at the Statue of Democracy in York University. After around 1 or 2 days after, I recognized that that flower has been burned, and it's like really dark marks on the floor, on the wall and the floor around it, but like no one really deals with it. So that's kind of the part we are trying to do right now. So that's why from our Canadian side, we are trying the best we can to have a coalition and push forward the bill called C-70, which is regarding to put the foreign registration and the regulation.
I want to thank our witnesses, not only for your testimony, for your individual bravery in standing up and shedding a light on this, whether it was in 1989, sir, or whether it's today in 2024. As a career-long intelligence officer who worked in China, there was hope. There was an opportunity to make a change. But we have seen that door quickly shut, whether it's in the direct ramifications of what's happening in the transition of Hong Kong back to dictatorial rule by Beijing, whether it's what's happening to the people inside of China, whether they be Uyghurs or minority members being oppressed by their own government, or as you have highlighted, individuals who are the children of the '89 revolution within Tiananmen Square, or the next generation who continue to be both hunted, bullied, and clearly abused. We have to make a change. By calling out China, you are doing a direct service not only to your fellow countrymen, but to individuals and humanity around the world. I'm truly emboldened by your bravery, and I thank you for being here with us today. With that, as chair, I'd like to recognize Commissioner Representative Wexton for her comments and questions before the witnesses today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As members of the committee already know, last year I was diagnosed with progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP. I describe it as Parkinson's on steroids and I don't recommend it. PSP makes it very difficult for me to speak, so I use an assistive app so that I can participate and you can understand me. I want to thank the chair and co-chair for allowing me to do both today. China's continued suppression of the free press is a grave human rights concern. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the Chinese Communist Party's efforts to bury the memory of its crimes at Tiananmen Square. That's why I'm happy to be leading a resolution with Chairman Smith, marking the 35th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. It is critical that the Chinese government end its censorship of speech about the Tiananmen Square massacre, and stop its intimidation of families mourning those lost in 1989. This question is for the whole panel. Starting with Karen, what are the primary challenges faced by activists working to preserve the remembrance of the Tiananmen Square massacre despite censorship by the Chinese government?
Sorry, is it possible that you repeat the question?
Sure.
Activists working to preserve. This question is for the whole panel. Starting with Karen, what are the primary challenges faced by activists working to preserve the remembrance of the Tiananmen Square massacre despite censorship by the Chinese government?
Thank you for your question, Representative. Since I'm currently a student on American campuses, I think I can only speak on behalf of my other fellow student activists here on American campuses. And I think the greatest challenge that we face right now is the looming fear of transnational repression, not knowing what form it's going to take tomorrow, or not knowing from whom it's going to come. And I mentioned in my testimony that unlike Uyghur or Hong Kong dissidents, Chinese overseas students encounter distinct obstacles when attempting to reveal such instances of transnational repression and coercion by CCP. And I think the situation faced by Uyghur or Hong Kong dissidents are objectively much more worse than ours. We, the Chinese overseas students, often feel that we have too much to lose. By coming forward and tell our stories, not only we risk the families, the core families of ours in China, but also the social connection that we have here with our peers, Chinese students. But if the institution here is willing to offer students more support and protection of identity, such as how CECC is doing today, by giving this precedence of anonymous testifying to me, then I think more Chinese students will be willing to come forward and tell the stories. I think this is the largest challenge faced by our community, and this is the solution to it. Thank you.
Can I jump in? Or
Sure.
okay, can I okay, yeah, I think this is such an important, excellent question. I hope I can jump in a little bit. As an individual, I've been attacked all these years, first by the nationalistic students, and also at the same time, as Karen mentioned, that the fear, right, to our families being taken hostage by the regime. And we see that this is starting to happen in Hong Kong as well. So things are deteriorating, and we face this as a human being. So that's why I argue in my book that sometimes being idealistic and trying to fight for a human rights cause in China means you can be selfish. That means that you choose to do what's the right thing to do, but the human price, the personal price that pay is not just you, because the CCP is always seen by association. They also punish your loved ones in order to control you. They intrude your private space in order to control your public activism. I think that's something that we have to face as a human being. They take advantage of the most beautiful thing in human life. That's your love for your family members, and then they control you. And secondly, I think engagement in as a scholar, for me as a teacher in campuses, either before in Hong Kong or American campuses, I think it's also extremely important, not just focusing on Chinese students or American students or Hong Kong students. I think the engagement, the community that we built, like for example, when I was at Harvard, I organized annual Tiananmen conference every year, even after the semester ended. And And the students wanted the Tiananmen mothers to know that whatever the CCP is doing and saying, that we, some young people here, are still remembering and we care. I think that message from the younger generation is important. It's also a message of hope. And I believe that many of us, not just someone who studied Tiananmen, I think many of us on American campuses, in Hong Kong it's very difficult now, but I know my colleagues still carry on. But if you're in freedom, if you're in democracy, please make full use of the classroom space that we have to engage and to educate the younger generation, not just about China, not just about Tiananmen, but about the importance to stand up for those who cannot speak for themselves, like the Tiananmen mothers. Thank you very much.
I think it's my turn right now. So if I haven't got the question wrong, it's pretty much discussed about the what's the barricade we're facing, what's the circumstances we are facing, and what kind of support we need. So at the current stage, I'll be really direct based on what I have in the data and experience. So first of all, I categorize 4 categories that's like the new generation, not only new generation, pretty much for every protesters against the Chinese Communist Party overseas might require. First of all, the most important one is the identity. Without a safety identity, you might be facing the risk of returning to China at any time. So that could be a huge consequences. And additionally, funding support. Many of the young organizations, from what I know, they are really, really broken, and most of them are really based on donations and fundraising, which is not way from enough from what the political activists might possibly be need. For example, I've been spent a couple $100s on get the speakers for Assembly of Citizens, and it's still not being like paid yet, but it still take a time. Additionally, the legal support. So in many cases, we do need many of the various policies to support the activists on doing what we are doing right now. For instance, where I came from, Canada, we do have a little bit shortage on these kind of circumstances, so we are trying the best we can to push our bill forward through the Congress in order to get the political and legal support from a more legitimate way. Eventually, the last but one of the most important thing is we do need support from the professional side. For instance, the technician, rules of having the meetings, or the SOP or standard formula of how to deal with conflict or sexual harassment, these kind of procedures. We need some advice from the professional side, but this one is pretty much linked with the second point, which is the founding problem. Just the main goal is just trying to establish our community and our organizations to be more professional, to be more standard, and this is one of the most important thing our generation trying to establish and complete. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add on. For me, over the last 35 years, the main challenge here is the collusion of the large tech companies with CCP regime in silencing the commemoration of Tiananmen. My own accounts across 2 different platforms were shut down at different times, both because I commemorate Tiananmen anniversary, and what's more important is that FBI investigation revealed that every company with business in China has such an operation, that they would sometimes even hire state security agent to tell them, what to do in terms of censorship and surveillance. That puts everyone in danger, not only us. And, for example, Apple, when some protester in China use airdrop to distribute the messages, and Apple stopped this function very soon, very quickly, as it was happening. And just recently, I met someone who used airdrop in China, and his information was leaked. Police detained him. There's no other way other than Apple providing some inside information from the company that this kind of service can be tracked. So that's the kind of area I think we need more clarification. I would urge there will be a hearing on how U.S. tech companies work with CCP in this aspect, because a large part of the transnational repression is also enabled by the online surveillance. For example, someone was revealed online because the website that he used leaked the information of his IP somehow to CCP hackers, either willingly or unwillingly. But yeah, we must look into this. This is a very broad issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, seriously. Please. No, seriously.
Thank you. Does any member have any additional questions for any member of the panel? Hearing none, I want to thank the witnesses for their bravery in speaking out against repression and in support of the Tiananmen victims and democratic self-determination. As an American who has lived her entire lifetime in a free society and a democratic republic, I can only imagine the repression that you all have seen. Please know that you have friends here on both sides of the aisle in Congress. Zhou, what insight can you provide on the activism of Tiananmen Square survivors and their work to push for freedom in China?
Right. Did anyone want to say anything finally for the record? Professor He?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It just means so much that I was hesitating for a moment because I was traveling nonstop and I wonder if I could do this, but I'm so grateful to have this opportunity and I'm so glad that I do it. I hope that people will remember the Tiananmen mothers and remember those young people who lost their voices in 1989 and also the struggles of the Hong Kong people right now, ongoing. Please pay attention to them, to how Hong Kong is now becoming really another city of China politically in terms of the repression, and please fight with us in solidarity. Very often we feel weak, we feel vulnerable, we find it difficult. It's just so meaningful to be with Fengsuo and the other two younger generation today, 35 years after Tiananmen. I saw that the torch is being carried on. And if we want light, we must conquer darkness. Thank you so much.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I would add something. The white paper protests and the success of it, it was the first public protest that forced CCP into changing its policy, showed that there is a very vibrant cyber community engendered by Twitter, Telegram, Instagram, Facebook, and so it's very important to keep this civil society, this is in cyberspace, strong and alive. And for example, today there is just tremendous commemoration of what happened 35 years ago, way stronger than any time in the past. But this is happening because there is a cyberspace. And what happened during the white paper protest also showed that the narrative in this civil society on virtual space is crucial for change in China. The white paper movement also showed that the overseas diaspora organizations are important and effective in bringing change to China today. When Pen Lifa's message was silenced in China, it was preserved and broadcasted all over in this virtual space, parallel to the censored space in China. This is why my organization now wants to focus our work on digital rights and freedom of expression and the diaspora community building, especially with young people and the new immigrants who are disillusioned by Xi Jinping. Furthermore, I want to applaud the recent steps taken by law enforcement and the Congress to push back against transnational repression. I have seen perceptible changes in the environment because of the recent actions. But the Chinese diaspora overall still lives in fear in the shadow of CCP's repression. It is vitally important that we continue to work toward providing a secure environment for people to live free of persecution. In doing so, the United States must center its policy towards China around China's democratization and respect towards human rights. In conclusion, I thank the Congressional-Executive Commission on China for your unfailing support on this very important issue. On the 35th anniversary of Tiananmen, I urge you to listen to the voices of the Chinese people who have fought for freedom and to protect the rights of those who seek to express themselves freely and openly. I believe in the future of a democratic, free, and beautiful China. We are all working toward it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Yang or Corin?
I would like to also briefly add what two things I think the policymakers could do to address this very specific transnational repression that the Chinese students on American campus is experiencing right now. The first is to compel the Chinese Student and Scholar Associations, known more common as CSSAs, on American campuses to be transparent about their funding sources. CSSAs provides a community for Chinese students who have only recently arrived in America, but at the same time, many of its members receive funding from the Chinese consulate or embassies and serve as eyes for the consulate to identify and silence pro-democracy students. By compelling CSSAs to disclose their funding, we can ensure that this community, important to many, does not become a vehicle of CCP's long arms of repression. The second thing I think is to urge university to establish a comprehensive response mechanism and support network for students facing transnational repression. This could include many things, like setting up campus task force against transnational repression, offering security support for on-campus events in which students participating potentially face the risk of being identified and harassed. If we are able to put such a response mechanism in place, then more pro-democracy Chinese students will feel more comfortable expressing their political thoughts in campus spaces without needing to go through what me or my friends was forced to put through. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Basically, my report is a bit too long, so I'll just brought the most important thing that I believe right here. On the political advice, I would say the U.S. Can be the partner of the with China on trade, but it have to based on the American people are the partners in human rights with Chinese people. This is the most important thing. And eventually, I want to talk to all the people who's watching this live. Came to North America or came to a freedom place is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. It's the end of beginning. There's a long way to go. There's a long struggle to go. But luckily, we got the Congress. We got every free government, responsible government on our side. We got pretty much all the people loves freedom and democracy on our side. So maybe you are having melancholy or stress right now. Please carry on. We are with you, and everyone's with you, and we are eventually going to make it.
Well, thank you. And with those closing words, the hearing is adjourned.